Sorry about your barn.
You're listening to 91 Reasons, a journey into the twisted landscape of pop culture. Keep your hands and arms inside the podcast at all times. And now, The Voice, Jeff Tucker.
You know, it's weird to find a movie that has a good pedigree, well-established writers, a good premise, moderately famous people in it, and it just slips through the cracks. Like, it just vanishes. It's weird to see movies like that. Like, what movies get selected for remembrance, and what movies just get, you know, pushed to the side. And this is also a lot like the problem I have with modern music, not modern music, but modern nostalgia music, because I did a whole show about 80s music and, like, who gets to pick what they play over and over again. Who decided that Take On Me was the anthem of the 80s, or Don't Stop Believin'? Like, these songs were okay, but they weren't like the song that played every day on the radio. Take On Me only got played because of its video. Its video made it a thing. Same with Sledgehammer. You know, the songs are okay, but the videos were another level, and they just played them over and over again. Does that mean that MTV ultimately decided what the 80s soundtrack was going to be? I don't know. But maybe it's like that with movies, where it's not about popularity or who's in it or how it was made, but instead it's who signed their name on the dotted line, what contracts were signed to keep whatever movie that was in the public eye. And, you know, I'll bring it up because I made a list of some of the bigger movies of 1988. 1988 was not a really good year for movies. Of course, there are exceptions where there are good movies that came out, but it's not like summer of 1985 where every movie that came out was memorable in some way, or summer of 1989 where you had Indiana Jones, Ghostbusters, Batman, all in a row, bang, bang, big movies, Lethal Weapon 2, you know, those were big summer movies. 88 had moderate movies that have lasted, but not all of them, and some of them for unknown reasons, other than, you know, one will stick out because it's amazing and has stood the test of time, but there are weird things going against. I'm talking in riddles, I know that. So the movie I watched was Vibes. It's a 1988 movie directed by Ken Kwapis. I recognize the name instantly because he's directed a lot of episodes of The Office. He has a solid comedy film pedigree. He's done a lot of solid comedies. The Office episodes he's done have been very good. One of his early attempts here, for whatever reason, just gone. You know, Vibes had a limited DVD run. It came out on Blu-ray. It's now, you know, if you look up Blu-rays on eBay, you can get nearly any movie for just a few dollars. And then some are like never under 14 or 15. And that's pretty hefty for basically a catalog title, but it's all about how many they made. So they didn't make a lot of Vibes. I want to thank Hendel for helping me figure out how to watch this movie because it's just not available. Maybe Cyndi Lauper had something to do with it. We'll get to what it's about in a second. Want to thank Duncan McKenzie for leaving a nice comment that said, basically, when are you going to do classic movie reviews again? And I thought, yeah, I should. I should watch an older film, something maybe I know or something I've never seen. I don't know. So I watched Vibes because Duncan said, do an older movie. He suggested 2010, but if you remember, I did an episode a few years back of movies I missed. I have never seen 2001, and because of that, I have never seen 2010, the year we make contact. Isn't that odd? Two big space movies, and I've just never seen them. I know, it's a cinematic crime. I did have, this is how weird I was when I was a kid. I used to tape record. I used to record on Beta Ebert and Siskel at the movies. I idolized Roger Ebert up until the day he died as the greatest film critic of all time. Even with his flaws, he was the greatest film critic of all time. But I used to record at the movies because it had movie scenes, and I would watch them over and over again. And whatever episode had 2010 on it, I watched it a lot. So I remember the sequence where Roy Scheider and the guy are talking, and the Russian guy goes, "It's going to be a piece of pie." And he goes, "Cake. Piece of cake." Like he's explaining American slang to him. So, you know what? I will get to those movies. Thank you, Duncan, for spurring me on to get back into the swing of things. COVID has derailed everybody's life. And you'd think I'd be sitting here doing an episode every day. I know I did vlogs every day for 2 solid months, thinking that was going to be the end of this thing. But sadly, it's not. And I've been so busy with gearing up with Knott's opening up the Taste of Calico and all the things I'm working on for that and behind the scenes. And I've been eBaying a lot to make more money. So I've been keeping busy. And the show just kind of... that thing that you always looked forward to as an outlet suddenly becomes a burden in the face of adversity. I know that doesn't make any sense. It might to you, kind of does to me, and I'm the one that said it. But I would sometimes look like, oh, I don't want to sit out there and talk for an hour. I don't want to do it. You can't make me do it. And other times it was like, I have to do it. I have a story I have to tell. And I have to tell you, I have laid in bed the last 2 or 3 nights thinking of different approaches to episodes, because like I've said, it's not enough to say, hey, I watched a movie and let me talk about it. I have to, like, what am I going to approach it at? What is going to be my angle? Because my show's different, because I'm a weirdo. So the angle this time was, how did a movie with this much going for it not be remembered? Because I don't think anybody knows this movie. I've never been anybody that's even seen it or heard of it. And that's weird, because it's a relatively... people involved should have made that... It should have made it a known film, a known quantity. But I've also laid there and I had this idea for an episode about my mom, which I'm going to talk about. And that's a more personal episode. But, you know, Duncan was like, hey, you've got to do a movie episode. So I am doing a movie episode. So let's talk about the spring, summer, and early fall of 1988. For most of 1988, I was 16 years old. I was a very young 16-year-old. Oh, my God. I hated being a teenager. Looking back, I'm very nostalgic for movies and friends and good times. But high school was pretty hard. I was bullied. People wanted to beat me up. I did not conform the way people wanted me to. In 86 and 87, I dealt with, my father being killed and the court battle to prove that I was his son, doing plays that were depressing, having good friends of mine suddenly graduate and they're not in my life anymore. So it was a real weird time. And, Back to the Future is now 3 years out. No Back to the Future. No announcement yet of the sequel, even though the video promised it when I got it, that beta tape on first day. So, summer of 88, it just continued my tradition of, I just went to the movies a lot. I escaped to the movies. That's been one of the toughest things about COVID. There's no movies. I can't go to the movies. We missed all these big summer releases. Ghostbusters was going to come out. I didn't get to see Ghostbusters. I didn't get to see Black Widow. The studios are trying to let me see Tenet, but I can't get to see Tenet. Some way I'm going to see Bill and Ted, but it's probably going to be right there in my living room, telling my kids to shut up so I can enjoy it. But back in 1988, it was all about going to the movies. Beetlejuice came out. That's a big, big movie that has lasted the test of time. I mean, it's a Broadway musical right now, for God's sake. So I made a list of some of the movies of 1988. Beetlejuice, Arthur 2 on the Rocks. That's a movie nobody remembers, but I've always had a soft spot for it because I liked the first one so much. Second one's not as good, obviously, but it's still not bad. Dudley Moore is still very good in it. License to Drive. I worked at the video store at this time when all these movies came out on video. And I'll tell you what, man, people rented License to Drive like it was going out of style, man. And it did have, yes, it had the two Corys, blah, blah, blah. But it did have Heather Graham, and it did have a fantastic theme song, Get Out of My Dreams, Get Into My Car, by the great Billy Ocean. I have an unnatural love of Billy Ocean. My family laughs at me because we will sit around and watch YouTube, and everybody gets a turn. And when my turn comes, I love to put on Billy Ocean, man, whether it's back in the day or, he still performs now, and he looks so cool. He looks like somebody from The Matrix. He's got gray dreadlocks, and he's all cool looking. I have always had a soft spot. Man, I love Billy Ocean, man. Short Circuit 2, that was the movie that people used to bring back to the video store and yell at me because it's advertised as a kid's movie, but it features a scene where they beat up Johnny Five and he bleeds oil. And people would get so angry, and I'd say, I don't make the movies, I just rent them. Of course, Midnight Run. If I had to look at 1988 and say, what's the movie I've seen the most, it's either going to be Beetlejuice or Midnight Run. Midnight Run, it would change my life in the same kind of way that Back to the Future did, because Back to the Future made me want to be a writer. And in the 3 years or 4 years after, because I saw Midnight Run later, I had decided I was going to be a cop. I was going to go to the police academy. And not the fun one from the movies. But I was going to be a police officer until somebody said, Jeff, you're a funny guy. Why do you want to get shot? One of my friends who I worked with at Blockbuster. And so I read Charles Grodin's book where he talked about Midnight Run. But more importantly, he talked about if you want to be a writer or a performer, you have to keep going even though everybody tells you you're bad at it and you're never going to get good at it and you're never going to make a living. And his book, it's called It Would Be So Nice If You Weren't Here. I carried that around with me. I used to read that at the video store on my break and sort of take it to heart, and when I worked at Spencer Gifts. Fish Called Wanda, that's a great movie, an underrated movie that, again, I don't think anybody remembers, even though Kevin Kline won an Oscar for it. Kevin Kline won Best Supporting Actor for playing Otto in Fish Called Wanda, and I don't think people even remember that movie. Big Top Pee-wee, the follow-up to Pee-wee's Big Adventure, not as good, but Randall Kleiser, who directed it, did an okay job. He just how do you follow Tim Burton? It's hard to follow Tim Burton in a sequel. Clean and Sober, with Michael Keaton playing a recovering alcoholic, that my friends and I went and saw opening night. Because at that point, we knew a year later he was going to be Batman. So we were soaking up all of the Michael Keaton stuff we could. And at the video store, when Clean and Sober came out, we put the poster right behind the counter. And it's just a poster of him, like, looking over his shoulder or something. But my friend Randy Villani drew the bat cowl on him. Man, I wish I had that poster. Wouldn't you love to have some kind of artifact like that from your childhood, your teenage years? Like, we took the Clean and Sober poster and drew him to be Batman. We wanted to see what it looked like. Because at that point, there are no pictures yet. It wouldn't be until the movie Everybody's All-American with Dennis Quaid came out, and it had the trailer on it. And we used to hide that tape so we could watch the trailer all day at the video store. That's when Mac and Me came out. Remember Mac and Me? That's become a cult favorite these days. The McDonald's-funded E.T. ripoff. Young Guns, classic movie. A year later or two, I'd be working in the video store when Young Guns 2 came out, and people would yell at me because all of the characters they liked weren't in it. And I'd say, they all died at the end of that movie. You're aware that they died, right? Oh, I guess they can't be in this. No, they can't be in the sequel. Even though Sir John Gielgud is in the sequel for Arthur, even though he died in the first one, he does appear as a ghost. Nightmare on Elm Street, The Dream Master, saw that opening night. 8 Men Out, about the scandal of the baseball. We watched that a lot, my friends and I. It's hard to describe, like, why would we watch that a lot? But we did, 8 Men Out. And then, Hot to Trot. You ever seen Hot to Trot, the talking horse movie with Bobcat Goldthwait? And who does he talk to? John Candy, I think. This is one of the worst movies ever made. but we had 2 copies of it at the video store. And the guy who worked VHS, which meant that when movies got returned, we would scan them in and then put them on the shelf and then take the empty box and put it over in a bin. And his job was to take the empty boxes and put it back on the shelf. The other job was, as he was doing that, he was supposed to recommend movies to people. He was your personal video store valet. You know, nowadays, I mean, Blockbuster never had that. We had somebody put movies away, but nobody even talked to the customers at Blockbuster. But at Multi-Video, this guy's name was Buster, and Buster would his job was to talk to people. How's it going? Having a good day? Welcome to Multi-Video. And for some reason, he loved To Trot. It was one of his favorite movies. So he recommended it to people. So we used to gauge, like, every time a movie rented, it would earn the store $1. You rented it for $3, but John, the owner, explained 2 of it went to, you know, the costs of the employee, the building, the this, the that. So he made about $1 off of the rental. And I know To Trot, which, you know, cost probably $60 to buy for the store, ended up making him probably $400 or $500 because Buster recommended it all the time. Another movie that came out is Stealing Home with Jodie Foster. It's hard to describe the problem Stealing Home made for me. It came out late in the game, and I was at a point where, because I worked at the video store, I would just rent any movie. I don't care. I'd watch any movie. And this is a sappy movie about a kid losing his virginity over the summer with Jodie Foster. And then he comes back years later with her ashes, and where's he going to spread her out? It's really stupid. It's really cloying and manipulative. And I remember I watched it, and they always sent posters. So I brought the poster home, and I was going to hang it on my wall. My friend was like, why are you going to hang that stupid poster on your wall? I go, well, I just like movie posters. Yeah, but that movie doesn't mean anything to you. I go, it doesn't have to mean anything. I'll put it on the wall, and then next week I'll put another one nearly on top of it. I don't care. So he took a Sharpie, and he turned Jodie Foster into a clown. And it wasn't Randy Villani's good drawing of Batman. It was this other guy's bad drawing of a clown. And I was like, you ruined the poster. And he's like, no, I think I made it better. And I was like, please don't draw on my posters. Also that came out is Elvira, Mistress of the Dark. That's a fun movie. Interview Elvira for the 30th anniversary of that movie at Midsummer Scream a couple years back. And that was a lot of fun, talking about that movie. And one of the funniest things I asked her, because I watched the movie a couple of times. I really do it backwards and forwards. I wrote down anything I noticed in the movie so I could ask her about, just to keep the conversation going. And in one of the scenes, she is talking to these 2 guys at a restaurant while one of them is reading a comic book. And in the film, the other guy grabs a comic book and rips it up and then throws it. And I said, do you have any idea how much that comic would be worth today? And she said, no, I have no idea. I said, well, that was Todd McFarlane's first cover appearance drawing Spider-Man. So if it's because that's the Action Figure Authority. If it's the Comic Authority slab where they put it in plastic and they grade it, if it's a high grade, that comic book has sold for like $60,000 because it's so rare to have in mint condition. And she just kind of looked at me. Maybe it wasn't 60. It was like maybe 7,000 or 8,000. Like, it was really expensive for a comic book of the 80s. And she looked at me and she said, Jeff, I think we did that take 10 times. So he ripped up 10 of them, and I was like, oh, well, that's why they're so rare. Because of the Elvira movie. Who knew? Another movie that came out was Heartbreak Hotel. This is Chris Columbus's second movie after directing Adventures in Babysitting, which was a moderate hit for him. He wrote Goonies. He wrote Gremlins. He wrote Young Sherlock Holmes. Then he directed Adventures in Babysitting. So he was on the way up. And Heartbreak Hotel put him back on the way down. And it wasn't until John Hughes let him direct Home Alone that he became a bona fide superstar director. He would go on to direct Mrs. Doubtfire and 2 Harry Potter movies. and Percy Jackson, and a lot of movies. I think he directed Bicentennial Man, if you've seen that one. But Heartbreak Hotel, have you ever heard of this movie? Charlie Schlatter plays a young kid who is running a hotel in his hometown, and it's about to go out of business. And so they find out that Elvis is going to be... this takes place when Elvis was still alive. Like, he has just finished his movie career, and this is before the '68 comeback special. So Elvis's star is on the downward trend before the '68 comeback special brought it back up. Or you know what? It might even be the '70s, like near the end. I don't remember exactly because I do own this movie, even though it's really hard to find. But they end up using this woman to pretend to be Elvis's mom as a ghost. So they kidnap Elvis so he'll teach them how to be cool and save their hotel. I am not kidding. That is the plot of this movie. And David Keith, or Keith David, both are good actors. The one from Firestarter, he plays Elvis, and it's a pretty sweet little movie. But for whatever reason, it bombed big time and almost derailed Christopher Columbus's career completely. Another movie that came out, The Blob, the remake of The Blob. Now, the remake of The Blob starring Kevin Dillon is a really good movie. Kevin Dillon and Shawnee Smith. And I saw it, I think, 3 times in the theater, just because it was a really well-done remake. It's not cheesy, it's scary. The effects are better, of course, than the original. It takes all the stuff they learned on the original and makes it better. And then... the biggest, it's not the biggest movie. That's what's so ironic about this list. I'm going to count down the top 10 grossing movies of 1988. And I'm going to get to the bottom. You're going to be shocked, folks. The number 1 film of 1988 was Rain Man. This is the Best Picture movie with Dustin Hoffman and Tom Cruise. Rain Man is a classic. Barry Levinson directed it. $354 million worldwide. Second is Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Robert Zemeckis, $329 million worldwide. An astounding number. An astounding film. Number 3, one of my favorite films of all time, Coming to America, $288 million worldwide. Number 4 is Crocodile Dundee II. Do you even remember Crocodile Dundee II? That's the one where they have to escape back to the outback. It's the exact opposite plot of the first one. The first one is he's a fish out of water in New York because he's from the Australian outback. The sequel is he takes his wife, Linda Kozlowski, to the outback to escape some bad guys, and she's the fish out of water. There you go. There's the 2 plots. That movie made an astounding $239 million worldwide. This is back when ticket prices are like $4. You know, they're $5 maybe. Go to the Twilight Show, it's cheaper. I don't think people even know who Paul Hogan is. But at one time, he was the biggest movie star on the planet. Or one of the biggest. Number 5 is Twins at $216 million. This is the film that the studio didn't want to make. They said Schwarzenegger was a fool, so he took no salary and instead decided to take a huge chunk of profits. And he said he ended up making more money on Twins than any other film of his career. Like, how about that? I saw Twins opening day in the theater. Number 6 was Rambo 3 at $189 million. Number 7, Fish Called Wanda at $177 million. Number 8, Cocktail at $171 million. Number 9 is Big at $151 million. And number 10 is a tie at $140 million worldwide, a tie between the Naked Gun movie and arguably the most remembered movie of 1988, Die Hard. Like, did you know Die Hard only made $140 million worldwide? That's less than half of Rain Man, less than half of Roger Rabbit, less than half of Coming to America. That's insane. But if you ask somebody, like, what's the biggest movie in 1988, and give them Coming to America, Crocodile Dundee II, and Die Hard, what's the biggest movie of the year? What's the bigger movie of the year? They go, oh, of course, Die Hard, man. I love Die Hard. And you go, no. Die Hard was number 10. That's crazy to me. I didn't know that till I put it on paper, that Die Hard only made that amount of money. You just sort of think it's ubiquitous with big, giant action. It changed the action movie genre. It practically invented the lone guy, without a weapon, and he's vulnerable, and he gets beat up, and John McClane this, and that whole weird debate of whether Die Hard is a Christmas movie or a summer movie. And why is that a thing? First off, it's a dumb argument. And people start arguing about it, I just tune out because I just don't care. Because the answer depends on your perception of the film and your experience with it. The plot of Die Hard takes place at Christmas time. The trailer goes, it's Christmas Eve in the City of Angels. And Detective John McClane, New York Detective John McClane. And then he goes, all things being equal, I'd rather be in Philadelphia. It's Christmas Eve in the City of Angels. Yes, the movie takes place on Christmas Eve. There's a Christmas tree in it. The movie takes place at a Christmas party. It ends with Argyle saying, man, if this is how you spend Christmas, I can't wait to see New Year's Eve. And he goes, oh, the weather outside is frightful. You almost expect the limousine to take off into the sky. It's so ridiculous. So yes, the movie takes place at Christmas time. It's like a Shane Black movie. It's not a Shane Black movie, but it feels like a Shane Black movie because it takes place at Christmas time. Like Lethal Weapon. Like Long Kiss Goodnight. Like Iron Man 3. Except, Die Hard was released in July. So when I went and saw Die Hard in the theater, it was 100 degrees outside. So whenever I think of Die Hard, I think of the summer. And that's why, to some people, it's a summer movie, because we're old, because we saw it in the theater, because we didn't see it for the first time on VHS, or Laserdisc, or DVD, or Blu-ray, even though I've seen it on all of those formats, because I'm that old. But Die Hard wasn't. It was the number 10 movie of the year, tied with Naked Gun. So, there are some iconic movies there in that list. Beetlejuice. Die Hard, Midnight Run. Tucker, the Man in His Dream. You ever see that? That's a Lucasfilm production. I actually enjoy that movie. It's a good movie. Roger Rabbit. Roger Rabbit's a great movie. Classic. Coming to America, one of my favorites. So you can see how it's a pretty good slate. It's not a great slate. Like I said, it's not 85 or 89 or 94. Those were big years for just sheer amount of big movies. But in 88, in August, I could have gone to the theater to see Vibes, and yet I didn't. And probably because I watched the trailer for it. The trailer's not very good. It sort of gives you an idea that Vibes is this wacky comedy about psychics, and it just didn't appeal to me. I was never a big Cyndi Lauper fan. I know Rachel is. Rachel kneels at the altar of Cyndi Lauper. I never really, it wasn't the greatest music. I enjoyed the Goonies soundtrack because I like movie soundtracks, but that's about it. I think Time After Time is her best song. But she's actually the top billed person in this movie. She's the top billed performer. It's Cyndi Lauper, Jeff Goldblum, Vibes. How about that? I fully expected Jeff Goldblum to get top billing, but he does not. Cyndi Lauper gets top billing. And I think maybe that's why the movie has sort of vanished, because maybe she didn't sign to have it continue to be released without her getting a higher percentage of what I don't know that. I have no idea. It also isn't helped by the fact that it's a Columbia Pictures release, and Columbia Pictures stumbled all through the 80s. They would have occasional hits, but they passed on more big projects than they agreed on. They let Back to the Future get away, among many others, and they were always sort of playing catch-up at the theater. They did better in the 90s. They had some big movies in the 90s, but Vibes was not one of their standout movies of the 80s. So Vibes starts with these two guys, and they're looking for something. You're not certain what they're looking for. They go through some beautiful Colombia scenery in South America. But they're trekking through with their llama, and they're finding something. You know what they find? They find the rarest thing of all. They find a movie set, because it transitions from actual on location to one of the cheesiest looking rock sets. I mean, it's so obviously fake. Why didn't they just go find that rock formation? Except that, you know, they move through this eye of the needle crevice so they can find something, and I guess the something had to be on a soundstage. It features effects by Richard Edlund, and when I saw that in the credits, Richard Edlund, I thought, oh, because, you know, Richard Edlund did Die Hard, I think, and he did some of Ghostbusters and a lot of movies. His career ended, I think, with Air Force One. I know they did Air Force One. They did that horrible plane crash that sort of derails Air Force One at the end because it's so bad looking. But Boss Films did a lot of big projects. I think they're still around somewhere, but they're just not as big. I mean, everything's digital now. And these guys did everything practical and in-camera optics. So these guys stumble onto a movie set, and they find a pyramid, and it's a little tiny pyramid in the middle of an alcove. They put their hands on the pyramid, and light shoots out, and there's these lighting effects, and then the other guy pulls a gun and kills one of them. Maybe there's three guys, because one gets killed, one dies from touching the pyramid, and the other ends up in the hospital from touching the guy who touched the pyramid. So there's our setup. Now, this movie was written by Lal Gans and Babalu Mandel, the guys I talked about in the last episode. This was one of their babies. And it's high concept. But this is one that I might be willing to dig up the screenplay for, because I bet what they wanted to put on screen was not what they got. I'm sure the budget got slashed quite a bit. It was originally supposed to star Dan Aykroyd, but he was not willing to work with Cyndi Lauper, which I'm sure he thought of as stunt casting, because at the time she's not an actress. You know, she's a one-note voice. I talk like this, and you know, if you like that, that's great. That's for you. But it's very specific, you know. Madonna made some bad movies in the 80s. I mean, Who's That Girl? Shanghai Surprise. These are terrible movies. Cyndi Lauper only made, other than this, I couldn't even tell you what other movies she made. But this one's not so good. But it's not her fault. She's doing her thing. I think vibes bond because, again, there's other movies you need to see in the theater. This is not a must-see. Columbia probably dropped the ball on advertising, number of prints, which means less screens, which means you have to drive out of your way to find it, and before you find it, it's out of theaters. It's gone. And then it shows up on video, and the store doesn't know what it is, so they buy one copy. That's how movies died in the 80s. So then we cut to New York, and we're at an institute for psychics. So the premise of the movie is that people who have psychic powers are real. It's not a joke. It's like these people are the X-Men. They have actual superpowers. And everybody just sort of accepts it, or in the case of Jeff Goldblum, they use it as a parlor trick. It's very strange, because if you believe wholeheartedly in the universe that Vibes is setting up, then you are accepting as a fact that ghosts are real, the afterlife is real, telekinesis is real, astral projection is real, clairvoyancy is real, ESP, like these are all real things. And it's all treated as a goof. It's very strange. That's the tone of the movie is weird, because why wouldn't these people legitimately use their powers to play the lottery, to go to Las Vegas, to win big and then retire? Because they're all sort of down on their luck. How could you be down on your luck if you have a legitimate superpower? In the first 10 minutes of the movie, we watch an old guy move an ashtray for real. Another guy with the poor Heavy of the piece, the villain, he's got like a baby voice. I know that he was probably told to do this Russian voice, but it doesn't come off as Russian. Like, it's not, I am Russian and I will get you. It's more like, I can't even do it. It's like a baby voice, and it's very off-putting. Not the actor's fault. That's how he was directed. So, Goldblum's power is he touches things and he can tell you their history. So, he touches a knife, and this was used to make breakfast. He touches another knife, and it was used in a murder. And he's like, why would you do that to me? Now I'm going to think about that. Then he touches the table, and somebody had sex on this table recently. That's enough. And he's right on every time. Cyndi Lauper's powers are sort of all over the place, depending on what she needs to do. She has a ghost named Louise that she talks to, and Louise gives her information that she needs at any given time. Or Louise can affect people. It's power of convenience. Whatever power you need in that scene, Louise gives you. So, Babalu Mandel and Lau Gans, this is not on par with Splash or Gung Ho or Parenthood or City Slickers, high concept comedy. It's all over the place because you're just not sure why these people aren't doing something more productive with their powers. Jeff Goldblum works at a museum, and they want him to touch mummies and tell him the history of the mummy. He wants to do it by looking at it. But the boss at the museum wants him to do parlor tricks with investors. Like, it's all bizarre. So, Cyndi Lauper is visited by the great Peter Falk, who wants her to go to Colombia to help him find his son. She doesn't want to go, but he offers her a lot of money. We do get a really great early cameo by Steve Buscemi. I love Steve Buscemi. He only has one scene in it. He shines in it. You can see that he's playing this lech, and you're like, dude, you're going to be playing that the rest of your career up until Boardwalk Empire. And even then, maybe still. But he's a great actor, great character actor. He only has one scene in it, but he does well. So, Jeff Goldblum, one of the sidekicks, tells him that I think it's Louise, Cyndi Lauper's ghost. The gist is that Cyndi Lauper can't keep a man. There's this idea that Cyndi Lauper sleeps with everybody in the movie. Like, she will sleep with anybody if she thinks that will make the man stick around. And it's weird to see that as a trope, because they would never do that today. That would not be allowed for a female character. And if it did, it would not be a trait that people admire. But in this, it's just like, well, that's just who she is. She just is with a lot of men. And they use her and they move on. And she's upset about that, but she still does it. So Goldblum he doesn't believe his girlfriend's going to cheat on him. They actually show him in bed with his girlfriend. And he removes her panties. And while he's holding the panties, discovers by holding the panties that she has indeed cheated on him. It's a very funny scene. The girlfriend runs around and says, well, you can dump me or we can work through this, but it happened. Sorry, move on. Like, she basically tells him it's not his fault, but his choice, that he should just deal with it. So, of course, he will now quit his job, take the $50,000 that Peter Falk is offering, so that they'll go find his son and they will set out on their adventure. So when they land in Colombia, we're exactly at the 30-minute mark. Like, I was watching and I thought, well, this is now we've set up who they are. We know everybody's shtick, and they've decided to go on this adventure. I bet we're at 30 minutes. And when I clicked it, it was Cyndi Lauper gets off the plane at like 28 minutes. I was dead on. So they're going to go find the son. Of course, Peter Falk is lying. They're actually looking for that pyramid that we saw at the beginning of the film. The other psychic guy shows up, the baby voice guy, and he's going to threaten them. They go to visit the guy who ended up in the hospital. There's a lot of... This is what's frustrating about the movie. Not frustrating, but this is indicative of 80s movies. In the middle portion of the movie, We're going to slow way down. And we're going to have just character scenes. I have no problem with this. This is what makes good movies. But a lot of the stuff they do hinges on coincidence. It's a coincidence. They go to see him at the hospital the same time the bad guy goes to see him at the hospital. That's a startling coincidence. Exactly the same time. He shows up in Colombia while they're in Colombia. Well, it's not a coincidence because they're both after the same treasure, but he's in cahoots with all the bad guys. You'd think he'd lay low and just follow them. So the movie's, again, it's all over in tone. Cyndi Lauper ends up throwing herself at this guy. Jeff Goldblum is picked up at the hotel by another early appearance by Elizabeth Pena, who was also in The Running Man, and she did a lot of good. She was in Rush Hour. She passed away at a young age. I think she had cancer, poor woman. But she's a good actor. She only has, again, one scene in this movie, but she does shine as a would-be assassin who ends up... This is a comedy. She ends up falling over a railing to her death. And Jeff Goldblum gets stabbed. He's covered in blood. And, that's the coincidence. I knew, I'm missing a portion of it. They go to the hospital to get Jeff Goldblum's wound stitched up. And while they're there, the guy from the beginning of the movie is at the hospital, and the bad guy is at the hospital. So it's like, that's too many coincidences. And that's, unfortunately, the only way to move the story along is to have coincidences like that. But it does sort of stop the suspension of disbelief, because it's just too much to pile on. But I was hopeful at this point that because Richard Edlund is in the pre-credit, in the credits, that the supposed treasure at the end of this movie, called the Room of Gold, is going to turn out to be some Raiders of the Lost Ark type Ghostbusterish temple thing. I don't know, like the Temple of Zool. But I'm hopeful, because Richard Edlund did all the Ghostbusters effects, the Temple of Zool. It would be right in his wheelhouse. But there's an extended camping sequence where, again, Cyndi Lauper throws herself at Jeff Goldblum, who rebuffs. I mean, it's all like just will. There's a lot of will they or won't they, and Goldblum says the wrong thing, and Peter Falk is like, "You could sleep with me, toots," and you're like, "You're old enough to be her grandfather, dude." Cyndi Lauper runs around a lot of skimpy, nighty outfits. I think, if I'm being honest with myself, if I had found this movie on its initial video release in probably early '89, I probably would have enjoyed it and watched it a lot. Because Jeff Goldblum is really good in this movie. He is at the height of his Goldblum. Like, this is after The Fly, so he's established that he's going to play these smart, brainy, like it's almost typecasting. He goes from Seth Brundle to Guy in Vibes to Jurassic Park to Independence Day. It's all the same character, but it's because he's playing whatever we've decided Jeff Goldblum is, even if he's nothing like that in real life, which he probably isn't. So there's an extended camping sequence, and then the next morning, they found out that Jeff Goldblum, there's this weirdness involving a tablet piece from the pyramid that is shaking and leading Jeff Goldblum around. Again, there's probably an hour cut out of this movie to try to explain all of this psychic nonsense to people and how they're able to do all the things that they're doing, because in the movie, this movie is told fast. Things happen, boom, they happen, the next thing happens, boom. The coincidences pile up, the jokes are fast. There's a lot of clever one-liners. When Cyndi Lauper leaves his tent mad, he goes, no, this is exactly how I want to forget you. I'm not doing it justice. It's a very well said insult line. So the next morning, Jeff Goldblum comes, they think he's dead, and instead he comes down for, they think he's dead, and then Peter Falk is like, well, you could have slept with me last night, and you're like, ew, no. What? So Goldblum comes down from the mountain. He's found whatever they're looking for, like it's right there. They didn't have to camp. But then the bad guy shows up and kills Peter Falk. Like, stabs him in the back, and the guy drops dead. I just went, you mean he's really dead? In the movie, he's really dead? Oh my God. Again, tone, folks, we're all over the place. And that's what undoes this movie from being great, because it could be great. The bad guy is revealed to be Julian Sands, who was the professor of the Psychic Institute. He was finding psychics so that he could find one that could find this pyramid. I was never really certain what he was up to. And instead of just killing Goldblum and Cyndi Lauper, he holds them at gunpoint to show you need to show me where it's at. So, of course, they end up in the fake movie set again. It's so obviously a soundstage. And Julian Sand reveals that his plan is that there's no room of gold. Instead, there's a lost city. A lost city. It's so stupid. They get there, and you look over, and it's an entire city that if you had a helicopter you could have found, if you just went through the right passageway, it's not exactly lost. Like, it's not deep in the jungle. Where they find it, it's like just at the base of a mountain, and then next to the mountain, there's a whole city. How did nobody ever see this? Movie doesn't want you to ask that. And then the idea that I'm trying to enjoy this movie, because I'm always trying to enjoy the movie. You just go, well, it's a lost city. You know, it's like the same nonsense in Crystal Skull where there's a lost city and people are still living there. Well, how was it lost? Who feeds these people? I don't see any crops. So, there's a lot of fighting over who's going to get control. And Julian Sands' plan is he's going to lay hands on the pyramid. And he says something about he'll then have all the psychic energy in the world. Whatever that means for him, he's not psychic in any way. He'll get a lot of... But they've already shown us that the people who have psychic powers don't do anything with it except pick horse racing winners or parlor tricks. It's never... They don't solve crimes or anything. And they can't tell when Peter Falk is lying to them. It's all played pretty dumb. Then at the end, Cyndi Lauper lays hands on it, talks in tongues, and dispatches the bad guys. And all is well. It's rushed. The ending is rushed. It could have used a half hour of careful scenes placed throughout the film to add to the mythos. Maybe show us a flashback. What is this temple? What did they do there? Why is there psychic power? What can you do with the psychic power? I don't know. It's never explained. There's a first draft of this that's probably amazing. But studio edits, director edits, actor edits all factor into watering down whatever Lau Gans and Babalu Mandel were trying to say. And at the end, there's a stinger, of course, but not a stinger for a sequel. I guess at the end, the two main leads have gotten together, and they're going to have a relationship finally. And Louise, her ghost, has, in the finale, passed into the ether world, like she's now in heaven. So Cyndi Lauper doesn't have a ghost anymore with her. And I should say that there are no effects for the ghost. You never see the ghost. It's just acting. I have no problem with that. It's like when I was a kid watching Harvey with Jimmy Stewart and never seeing the rabbit. You just have to accept the rabbit in your imagination, and you have to accept Louise in your imagination. But at the end, she gets a new ghost, and it's Peter Falk. But you don't see him as a ghost. Like, he's not laying there floating there going, back from the dead. No, nothing like that. And then the movie just ends. It just slams down, and you get a really bad Cyndi Lauper song called There's a Hole in My Heart. You know, I enjoyed Vibes for what it was. I knew it wasn't high art. It's not what I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be like psychics trying to date and life in the big city, or maybe there's a quick adventure. It reminded me most of Romancing the Stone. It was a lot like Romancing the Stone. The backdrop, the colors, the saturation of the moisture in the Colombian hillsides. But the thing that it has going for it is, first and foremost, is Jeff Goldblum's performance. It's fantastic. It's worth watching just for that alone. He's very good in it. Peter Falk is very good in it. Cyndi Lauper is okay. But other than the performances, the best thing of the movie is the soundtrack. Again, if I discovered this in the 80s, I would have watched it a lot, and I probably would have bought the soundtrack. It's all traditional South American music. I think it's great. They would cut to a band at a club and like, oh, this is really good. A lot of flute playing really sets the tone. I was really shocked at how good the soundtrack is, because 80s movies either had synth pop soundtrack or pop song soundtrack. It's why Back to the Future stands out, because it's one of the few that had a traditional big movie full orchestra soundtrack. A lot of movies weren't going to spin that, so they went the cheap route with synthesizers. The best being To Live and Die in LA. Fantastic soundtrack. But this soundtrack is stellar. I'm going to seek it out anyways. I think it's very good. I bet I could find a cassette of it, which would be very kitschy, which I dig. But again, thanks to Hendel for finding vibes for me. Thanks to Duncan for spurring me on to do a classic movie review, because I haven't done them in a while. It's very cathartic to watch a movie, soak it in, and then talk about it. Let's talk about movies. Let's get back to living our lives, man. This COVID shutdown has to end at some point, right? Whether it's a vaccine or herd immunity, and we have to look for the light in things. We cannot live in the darkness forever. And part of my light is watching movies and catching up on my Star Trek The Next Generation, which I've decided to get back into after taking a little bit of a hiatus. I went back into it last night, finished an episode called Rascals, where Picard gets turned into a young child. It's not a very good episode. But then I watched Inner Light, which I think is the best episode of the series. Man, is it good. Where Picard is zapped by a probe and lives a whole life on a planet. He has kids and a grandkid, and finds out it was only like 20 minutes while he laid on the floor of the Enterprise. It is stellar storytelling. I've seen it before. It wasn't my first time seeing it. I knew it was good. I haven't watched it as I've gotten older. It gets better with age. It's better than any single anything on that new Picard show. This is Star Trek storytelling at its finest. It is about what it means to be human, what it means to make sacrifices, what it means to love and live and have a child and watch that child grow up and have their own children and regret. And oh, Inner Light is so good. I cried at the end. It's so well done. It's just top level storytelling. So, what have you been watching? Anything good? Anything worth talking about? Because that's what it's all about, man. It's about sitting around the virtual campfire, a term I haven't used on this show in a long time. But we're just sitting around the digital campfire, and we're telling stories like it's 1,000 years ago, man. I dig it. Do you dig it? Are you digging the vibe? They said vibes in the movie, and I politely applauded, because that's one of the movie rules. When they say the title of the movie, you must applaud politely. So, let's give it up for Vibes. Not one of the top movies of 1988, but certainly a movie that deserves more than it got, because it's better than it should be, but not as good as it could have been. I'm Jeff Tucker, and we continue to be 91 Reasons.
Thanks for listening to 91 Reasons. Please subscribe and leave a review on iTunes. Find us on Facebook. Is anyone even still listening?
Well, that wasn't such a chore now, was it?
Good night, future boy!